It might not come as a surprise that Rolex is not the only sports watch family to have a history. In fact, little do many know that its sister company, Tudor, has seen more than its fair share of extensive use over the decades. For example, countless military forces adopted the use of Tudor submariners, praising the Snowflake for its simple and legible dial. Some in the military even consider the Tudor Snowflake Submariner a better designed watch than the Rolex Milsub. And wouldn't you believe, but Tudor watches have seen many expeditions in their lives as well. One of the most romantic expeditions in our recent history is the summiting of Everest, and how a Rolex accompanied the men all the way to the top. That happened in 1953. But did you know that a year before that, in 1952, a British scientific expedition led a team of men across Greenland, where they not only were the first to ascend over the Bath Mountains, but also conducted geology, meteorology, glaciology, seismology. The team of the British North Greenland Expedition received the Polar Medal. They were awarded OBEs and CBEs for their efforts of travelling and studying this terrain. And they were wearing Tudor watches. Watches that looked almost identical to the Oyster Perpetuals that the Everest expedition received. Now maybe it's not as groundbreaking as the Everest story, not as picturesque, but the watches were just as important to the men in Greenland. It might have been even more important if you think about it, especially in that climate. If you would like to see some footage of the expedition, I will link to a video from the Huntley Film Archive in the corner of the screen now. Just as Rolex wanted to push the name of the Explorer with their Oyster Perpetuals, Tudor followed suit with the Ranger, and this watch will be discussed in a future video. But the watch itself adopts a very traditional format. The typeface chosen is nearly identical to that of the 1016 Explorer and the earlier generations. The triangle at the 12 is replaced with the number 12 instead, which does give it an even more traditional look. But the differentiator is the use of the gorgeous IDGuy-inspired hour hand that has become a staple of the brand, and a style of hand that should be used more with their pieces. Notice the second hand plot is a square, not a circle, another interesting touch that allows the eye to break away from the rounded forms on the dial. Another interesting watch to refer to is the Ranger date. The model adopted a similar format to the standard Ranger but included a Cyclops lens. Soon after the Ranger became popular, and we had reached the 70s, the Ranger 2 was released, and much like the Explorer 2, it committed to 70s design styling. Not to such an extent that the 1655 showed, but the approach on this newer generation of the Ranger was defining, and a watch that surprisingly very much set the foundation for a few pieces that we see today. The dial and the indices, the combination of the hands, the batons, and simple squared-off numerals is really attractive. It looks like a tool watch, and would have improved the aesthetic even more if the bezel was flat and not fluted. It seems like a very strange choice for the watch, but then we are talking about the mid-70s. Nevertheless, the watch is rooted in that time period, and practically every element on the dial says so. It is a gorgeous look, very distinct and eye-catching. There is a nice pop of colour from the orange seconds hand that makes for easy legibility. Notice that the loom of the hand, again, is a square plot, and the choice of typeface is squared off. Interestingly, looking almost exactly like the numerals used on modern Rolex pieces. The newest Explorer generation is a clear example. Notice the 6s and the 9s. They both share a similar approach. And moving to the case and the bracelet, we see another typical example of a 70s approach, an integrated end link, leading to sectioned bracelet links that are in fact solid throughout. The only hollow parts of the bracelet are the interlocking center links that are folded. It makes for a really robust bracelet design, and would probably have been able to withstand a lot more than the conventional Oysters of the time. That then leads us to the modern era of Tudor pieces. The Heritage Ranger has been received with open arms by the community, as a viable alternative to the Explorer. Its size has been increased, but the general aesthetics of the dial, the hands, even the loom, gives off such a reminiscent feel. Again, it is a watch that will be covered in more detail in the future. But then Tudor released the North Flag, a watch that had a peculiar name, peculiar styling, with little information surrounding it about its origins, only that it was made to commemorate the North Greenland Expedition. And this is one of the reasons why I think many people find this watch to be quite confusing in the Tudor family. If it was not for the Ranger 2, this piece would not have any references to fall back on. And here we can see that the North Flag is very much a modern reinterpretation of the Ranger 2 in almost every way. With all of the above in mind, I think that this watch is well worth commending. Not only does it have a clear history of development behind it, but the resulting watch is a fascinating addition to the Tudor family that seems to spend almost all of their energy on heritage-inspired pieces nowadays. This watch has one of Tudor's first in-house movements, having a 70-hour power reserve, silicone hairspring and a full balance bridge, so the movement is beyond competent. It's a huge bonus. And I see the design of this piece falling into the category of retro modern very successfully. It has been able to keep a lot of the 70s attributes from past references, but also closed the gap, allowing it to situate itself well in the style of a modern approach today. That means that this design, at least in my mind, will manage to remain for a long time without ever looking dated. 50 years from now, this watch and its configuration will still have the same desired effect. So immediately, your attention is drawn to the 12 and 6 on the dial. Again, almost exact elements taken from the Ranger 2. They provide a central balance to the dial, which allows for the horizontal elements to change. And the most eye-catching feature is the power reserve at the 9 o'clock position. On one hand, it is a nice addition, since we barely ever see power reserve indicators on sports watches. On the other, how relevant is it if a watch like this is your daily wearer? Still, it is a practical complication that keeps you informed. And if this piece is a part of your weekly rotation, you will be able to judge when it needs to be wound. The reserve also gives the watch an added tool aesthetic. We see the use of yellow as the dominant spot color on the seconds hand, around the power reserve indicator and along the minute track, all excellently placed accents. And then across from the reserve, we have a date complication. It's an extremely simple watch, no frills, and it is all the better for it. The case and the bracelet, again, reminiscent to a 70s approach from the sloping lugs to a simple bezel with a black ring insert. It is unreal how much of the Ranger 2 played a part in the development of this watch, and it is a watch that is barely ever spoken about. Just seeing the two pieces side by side, look at the similarities. So this watch is very distinct, easy to read, appropriately sized and proportioned for the wrist, another huge bonus. I like the layout of the watch, and could see it as an essential tool for somebody who enjoys activities like biking, rock climbing, hiking, exploring, camping. But my brain questions the approach of this watch in a few places. And maybe it's just a hunch, but I would like to see if I could add anything to make it all the better. There is this feeling about the watch. To me, I find that it deserves to have more added to it. It's not trying to be simple with its approach. It has an excellent design language to work with, so why not make it all the more competent as an adventurer's tool? That's the brief anyway. And to quote-unquote improve the watch, I will be using influences from the 1655 Rolex Explorer 2, my grail watch. First, I feel that a piece like this could use some crown guards, something to add a bit more presence to the case, beefing it up a bit more, giving off the impression that it could be used more aggressively. Just the addition of crown guards gives it a different presence, a more sport, tool-oriented presence. Next to the dial. There is something about the Ranger 2 that grabs my attention, and it's the layout of the 12, 9 and 6. There is a nice balance between the three numerals, and it feels more complete. Then it's considering the placement of the power reserve. It's a great feature and gives the watch its character, so my thinking is to either place it at the center or between these 7 and 8 batons, possibly giving the indicator a slight rotation as well. Getting even bolder, why not add a skeletonized GMT hand into the mix? Possibly enlarge the date window and add a cyclops. All of these minor touches turn the watch from a simple instrument into something more akin to a real explorer's instrument. Granted, it may be overly ambitious in a few places, but that is the joy of design, throwing ideas around and seeing if something will stick. And my personal preference would be to have this watch on a fabric strap. To me, the contrasting colors gives it such a great punch, including the yellow stitching. Returning to the watch, as far as improvements go, I don't feel that it needs any in its current state. It shows a great opportunity to add improvements, but they aren't necessary. This watch very much embodies the Ranger DNA. It's managed to situate itself in a position where it flies under the radar as a performance instrument, but could still work equally as well in the roughest terrains. It also makes for an excellent watch to just throw on and do anything with. This watch already has garnered a great reputation in the Tudor community, and maybe because of its obscurity, it hasn't become popular in the broader community. And it is a pity that it hasn't gained more attention because it has the design, the build, and the historical development behind it that gives the North Flag an adventurer's status.